Panther turrets, cross-section. During the Second World War, the German army gained renown for their fast-paced maneuver warfare, which allowed them to overrun entire nations in short order. After their initial successes, however, the Wehrmacht found itself on the defensive. Though tanks and their mobility were still a vital part of the war effort, some were converted to a much more stationary role. Origins and concept. The idea of using tanks as a fixed bunker is obvious, at least in hindsight. Tanks, by their nature, are resilient, designed to withstand considerable punishment, while being able to unleash considerable firepower of their own. Furthermore, the First World War taught militaries around the world that tanks would be a vital component of any future conflict, and vehicles were produced in considerable numbers. These designs could become outdated quickly, as new technologies and methodologies led to the creation of more advanced tanks. Rather than scrap the obsolete designs, many were converted into makeshift bunkers at strategic locations. The first nations to do this were the Soviet Union, France, and Belgium. As they switched to a more defensive posture, the Wehrmacht made use of this tactic themselves, creating purpose-built tank bunkers. One type, nicknamed a Tobruk by the Allies after a Libyan city where they were first encountered, was a simple version of this concept. They were small, one-man bunkers usually armed with a machine gun or a small mortar, made from concrete, and topped with a small tank turret, such as captured French Renault light tanks. Sometimes, however, something more substantial was in order. Several defensive lines were devised by the German High Command to protect German territorial gains made in the early phases of the war, such as the Panther-Wotan line on the Eastern Front, the Atlantic Wall in northern France, as well as others in Italy and Germany. This need led to the development of what was called the Pantherturm. Among the arsenals of tanks used by the Germans, one of the most effective was the Panther medium tank. The decision to use the modern Panther turret as opposed to outdated designs was due to turret production outstripping the pace of Panther hulls. Rather than leave the already produced turrets in storage, they were pressed into service as stationary defenses. I found out I was being charged every month for my Voblet MRE deliveries when I'm not even in a battle right now. This is getting ridiculous. So I've been searching high and low for a service that'll cancel all my unnecessary subscriptions for me. And, well, that's where today's sponsor, Rocket Money, has helped me out. Rocket Money is an all-in-one finance app that lets you save money and spend less. They're helping customers save up to $740 a year with over 500 million in canceled subscriptions. I've been using it to track how much money I spend because I recently splurged and bought myself this $100,000 tank and this F-35 jet plane. Yeah, it can get a little out of hand. I need to chill with spending. I realize I'll get in a little accident one day if I'm not careful, so, I need to be reasonable with my money and make sure I'm budgeting appropriately. Yeah, we all have to do that. It's important. Rocket Money can also help you monitor your credit score, which is beneficial for so much of your life, too. So, if you want to save more and spend less and join the 5 million people that are using Rocket Money, use the link in the description down below to join right now or go to rocketmoney.com/simplehistory to get started for free. You can sign up for a premium membership that has even more benefits, or you can start today for free by going to rocketmoney.com/simplehistory. Thanks Rocket Money for sponsoring. Now, on to variants. In the closing months of 1943, plans were drawn up for these lines of defenses, with Pantherturms as a key element. The basic idea was very simple. A bunker would be dug, with the tank's turret used as the main weapon. There were 3 main variants of the design. The Pantherturm Einstahluntersatz, or steel support, was the first variant, intended to act as a cheaper and less time-consuming alternative for typical German concrete bunkers. Steel bases were chosen over concrete ones because steel could be installed during the upcoming freezing winter months. Pantherturm I would be made with prefabricated steel components welded together on site. In places where the front was more static, such as the Atlantic Wall, the Germans made use of a second variant, called the Pantherturm II Betonsockel, or concrete base. These were sturdy, providing the occupants with significant protection. A third variant, called the Schnelleinbau, or fast construction, would be made from wood and was also known as the Holzunterstand. Dimensions and sections. The bunker was divided into 2 major sections. The upper section was a square box roughly 3 meters by 3 meters and about 1 meter in height. Over the top of this section, the turret would be mounted. This compartment served as storage for ammunition and could hold up to 175 rounds of tank shells, while 4,500 rounds of machine gun ammo would be stored in the turret itself. The walls were up to 3 inches thick, providing the crew with significant protection. Underneath this upper chamber was a lower section. It was larger than the fighting compartment, around 6 feet in height, and was itself divided into different compartments. The first was the living compartment for the crew, which consisted of a commander, gunner, and loader, and had folding bunk beds and a stove that doubled as a heating system, which was attached to a flue for ventilation. Another section served as general storage, mostly for machinery and other odds and ends needed to maintain the bunker, and housed a 2-horsepower motor which powered the turret, a 150-amp battery, and a compressed air tank. The compressed air was needed to vent the barrel after firing, or the bunker would overheat, forcing the crew to open the hatches for sufficient ventilation, defeating the purpose of a sealed bunker. At the rear of the compartment was an escape hatch, which led to a vertical shaft, equipped with a ladder for access to the outside. Normal entry to the bunker was through a slit trench, which could measure up to 40 feet behind the installation. These were often connected to a much more extensive trench system. Turret and armament. For the most part, Panther Ausf-D and Ausf-A turrets were used for the role of stationary bunker. The Panther tank, regardless of type, utilized a powerful 75mm main gun. This is the same caliber it was found on the American M4 Sherman, which has a reputation as being a grossly underpowered main weapon. The German counterpart, however, had a more powerful powder charge to propel the shell and a much longer barrel, which allowed the expanding gases of the propellant to build up to a much higher degree, giving the shell a higher muzzle velocity. Because of this, the main gun could rip through all but the toughest armored vehicles. They were also equipped with a 7.92 coaxial MG-34 machine gun, useful for defending against infantry. The turret of the Panther was heavily armored, being up to 110mm of steel at the front and around 80mm at the sides, though this could vary based on the specific model of the tank used. This armor would also be sloped, which added to the protection provided by the steel. In addition to using the Ausf-D and Ausf-A Panther turrets, dedicated turrets were created. Based on the Panther designs, these were designated Panther-Ostwallturm and were simpler in design than those placed on actual tanks. The name roughly translates as Panther East Wall Tower, as they were initially intended to be used on the Eastern Front, though due to the more dynamic nature of the fighting there, most were sent against the West, particularly in Italy and along the Atlantic Wall. Some were also improvised during the defense of Berlin in the final stages of the war. Panther turrets in combat. Panther turrets would be arranged in groups of 12, with interlocking fields of fire and connected to a larger defensive network. They would be positioned at strategic locations, ideally on elevated ground, though not at the summit, but slightly lower to decrease the silhouette. When properly installed, the Panther bunkers would have a low profile and could be camouflaged, meaning they could surprise an advancing enemy and, if discovered, were difficult to hit. The thick, sloped armor meant that even direct hits could potentially glance off. Because the armor was thicker at the front, enemies would often be forced to attempt to flank the bunker, putting them into the firing line of another emplacement. There were some downsides, however. The positions would be camouflaged, but this limited their firing arc. The turret could turn a full 360 degrees if there were no other obstructions, but this would push aside any concealment that may have been placed to mask it from the enemy. Once discovered, the low profile and durable construction made destroying it from the ground difficult. Panther turrets were, however, thinner at the sides compared to the front, making them vulnerable to flanking. By the later stages in the war, the Allies had near-total air superiority, making the turret vulnerable to airstrikes as well as long-range artillery, for which they had no real defense against. Overall, the use of Pantherturm and other similar structures was a simple and cost-effective way to utilize scarce resources to hold on to ground already captured by German forces. In the later stages of the conflict, German logistics and industry was in shambles, and the use of the Pantherturm and other similar structures allowed them to recycle tanks that were already produced but were no longer operable. Tanks knocked out by enemy action, mechanical failure, or just a simple lack of fuel would not have to be scrapped or abandoned, but could still contribute to the war effort.